All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone, again for another edition of Moving Beyond the Coronavirus Economy series. My name is Tom Dufour. I'm the CEO with Big Sky Franchise Team. And as folks are joining us and loading into the session here, just wanted to remind you that if you are dialing in or want to share this, you love the presentation so much, we will have the replay available next week. So check out our YouTube channel for that or on our company blog that will be available. Our YouTube channel is bigskyfranchiseteam.com. And a quick plug, if you have not subscribed to our podcast, Multiply Your Success, please go ahead and do so at Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite podcast service. And with that being said, I am so excited to introduce our guest and longtime franchise friend, Emily George, and introduce you to the podcast or to the webinar audience to talk a little bit about your business, what you're doing. And Emily is with Franchise Business Review, awesome company that is really doing some really cool things in franchising. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Awesome, Tom. Thanks so much for having me. Hello, webinar audience. It is so fun to be here. I'm so excited to share some of this information. I know we've got kind of a broad cross-section of folks joining us today, so I'm just really excited to share a little bit more about the research that Franchise Business Review does and how that can help you all, whether you are considering franchising a small business that you currently have, or considering making an investment into a franchise system as a franchisee. So I think it will be helpful both ways. So let me pop up my screen share here, and I will get into some of these insights. And we should be seeing it now. So as Tom said, I'm Emily George. I'm a senior client consultant with Franchise Business Review. I've been around the industry for a number of years. Tom and I have been bumping into each other at franchise expos and franchise shows all over the country. And I've been with FBR for the last about 9 months now. So I'm myself even still getting into the data a little bit. What we're going to talk about today, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of who we are, what we do, and who we talk to. And then we'll break down the data into 3 segments. We'll talk about it from the perspective of franchisors, from the perspective of employees, and from the perspective of franchisees. And I'll kind of try to contextualize it as we go, how this may apply to you. So a little bit about us. We are at our heart a market research firm. We ask a lot of questions and we send out a lot of surveys. And we're looking to gather data from franchisees and franchise brands that can help us tell us about the industry. So the data that I'm going to share with you today comes from survey work that we conducted from June of 2020 through December of 2021. It's usually always a rolling 18-month period that we're working with. In that period, we surveyed 31,150 franchisees that represent more than 350 franchise brands across the country and internationally. In addition, our employee engagement survey that we call Franchising at Work surveyed 6,000 employees of franchise brands. And that could be corporate employees of a franchisor or employees at a unit level of a franchisee. The last piece of our puzzle is what we call the Outlook survey. The Outlook survey goes out every year to more than 200 franchise executives. So this is going to be C-suite individuals who represent executive teams, operations, and development folks across the industry. So we're talking to a fair number of people to gather these insights. What are some of the highlights we saw in that data? The big thing that struck us is that franchisee satisfaction is at an all-time high. It was not surprising to many of us as we went through the worst of the pandemic that there was strength in the franchise system. And that really is showing through in these satisfaction numbers. The other piece that we're seeing is that both franchisors and franchisees are optimistic about growth. I'll share some specifics about that and where they differ a little bit later on. And then, of course, this is not going to surprise anybody, but employee recruitment and retention is the #1 issue for both franchisors and franchisees. Nobody needed our survey probably to figure out that bit of information, but let's dive into some of the details. So from a franchisor perspective, about 84% of companies that we surveyed are reporting revenues that are equal to or higher than their pre-pandemic levels. And this is, again, from data starting in 2020. We were already starting to see some of these numbers. Average net operating margin is about 17%, but 35% of systems are reporting net profits greater than 20%. And that's a big rebound from what we were seeing early in the pandemic. Last statistic here, about 67% of the brands that we surveyed finished 2021 ahead of their franchise development goals. So what they wanted to be able to award in franchises, they were able to actually exceed that. And 33% of the brands we surveyed were actually more than 20% ahead of their goal. So what's kind of the takeaway for you all in something like this? Well, if you're thinking about using franchising as a growth engine for a small business that you already have, it's a very optimistic outlook for you when you think that 67% of brands were able to exceed their franchise development goals. Folks who are looking to invest in a franchise system feel comfort in making that investment and not maybe opening their own small business, but partnering up with a franchise brand to do that. So I think you can feel a fair amount of optimism and strength in the model if you're considering going into franchising. We always then kind of like to break it down into some of the key categories and indicators. Issues that significantly limited growth in 2021. You're going to see those top 3 categories are all around employment and labor costs. So as you're considering building the model of your brand, as you're considering building the system, is there anything that you can do to reduce dependence on labor? Can you kind of lighten up how many bodies need to be in a store to operate it? Anything that you can do to control labor costs, again, as you're building the model. So if you're just starting to think about, okay, how does this small business that I have turn into a franchise? Consider all of these elements because that's what your franchisees are going to be dealing with down the line. And if you can help them get ahead of some of these issues, you're going to have such a strong model to start with. And you can always evolve over time as the environment around you changes. But I thought that was interesting, just how much employment is really at the center of everything right now. Highest strategic priorities, and again, this is coming from a franchisor perspective. Franchisors right now care very much about franchisee performance, development, and so this is building more franchise units. And then, of course, customer experience and satisfaction. How is that end user actually experiencing their brand out in the market? You'll see kind of a few other things down the line, finances being at the bottom of this highest strategic priorities list. So again, your focus as you build out your model is always going to be on those franchisees and how you can make them most successful. So starting to plant those seeds in your mind now as you're considering is a great first step. Potential areas of significant risk. Again, no surprise, all in the employee space. Increased costs of labor, that minimum wage, whether it's mandated or not, continues to go up. We heard a little piece on Marketplace from NPR. UPS was reporting that they had previously been paying $13.50 an hour about a year ago and currently offering $21 an hour just to hire. I'm sure some of you are experiencing similar things in your small businesses, but again, something to consider as you're building out your model. If there's anything that you can do to reduce some of that overhead, reduce the dependence on labor in your model, that can be super helpful. and then just build some of these things, these considerations in. If you have to have 10 people to operate the business, how is that going to be able to be profitable? And just build it in from the beginning, because it doesn't look like these things are going away anytime soon. So that's kind of highlights from the franchisor perspective. Let's jump into employees just a little bit. So again, our Franchising at Work survey brought in responses from about 6,000 employees. The bulk of those employees are in corporate centers with franchisors. And here's kind of what we learned from them. Brain drain is real. With the Great Resignation, we saw a 55% drop in employees who had more than 7 years of tenure. So from a corporate perspective, that's a lot of historical knowledge to lose at one time, and can have a big impact on brands. What we thought was really interesting was to take a look at employee engagement versus tenure. And I think this is where there can be some really important considerations as you're building out a business model, or even as you're thinking about becoming a franchisee. What we're seeing here is that employee engagement is highest when an employee very first starts in a job. But let's be honest, when you've just started in a job, you may have very little to offer, because you're still learning that specific brand, your specific role. So you're very engaged, but you maybe don't have a lot to offer. Then we see a dip in employee engagement up to about the 3-year mark, and then engagement starts to come up again. So as you're really learning and you're really getting great at your job, you're getting a little less engaged. And then when you're really in that sweet spot that you have become an expert and a professional in your role, you get engaged again, but it's likely that you're starting to move on. So one of the things we're talking a lot about is, how do you capitalize on employees for the time that you have them? What can you build in terms of training, in terms of growth opportunities? What can you build in that first 1 month, 6 month, 9 month, in that first year of employment, to really keep them engaged, help them to see that future potential, and just absolutely maximize, both for yourself and the employee, what they're going to get out of that first 3 years? Because you're not going to have them forever. So how do you maximize the time that you have with them? One of the reasons we're talking about that is when we look at these employee engagement benchmarks, what employees told us were the best things about their work, and then the lowest rated areas is very telling. So things that are highest rated areas, they like the relationships they have with their coworkers. They think their skills and experience are a good fit for their job. Their overall job performance is above average. They feel good about the work they're doing. Their job is rewarding and satisfying, and roles and responsibilities are clear to them. On the flip side of that, what's challenging, they don't feel that senior management communicates clearly. Their goals and measures for performance are not clear to them. They're not receiving the recognition that they want. They don't see long-term opportunity for their career, and they don't feel great about the way they're compensated. So if you can set some guidelines and parameters for how you manage employees within your brand, I encourage you to really put time, effort, and energy into building your employee engagement program from the get-go. If you're operating a small business now and are thinking about franchising as a growth engine, consider now what an employee program can look like in your company and what you can offer to franchisees for them to adopt within their locations, so that you're really building a culture within your brand that is around employee engagement and tailored to your specific concept about how you can really manage employees, give them an amazing experience for the amount of time that you're going to have them, and so that the brand can have an amazing experience with them at the same time. So really interesting stuff in the employee space, and very much, these are big things, but they don't feel like insurmountable things. Providing clear goals, providing whatever that long-term opportunity looks like. And I think that long-term opportunity, just to pause there for a moment, long-term doesn't have to be 10 years. There are a lot of positions that are a 1 year to 3 year opportunity. I'm thinking about some of the brands who are likely hiring high school students as part-time employees. There should be a trajectory even for that employee. What can they gain during the time that they're with you? It's not always a 10-year long-term opportunity. So just to always be thinking about what that upside could look like, you're going to win if you put in that thought. So moving on to the franchisees. How are franchisees feeling about the work that they're doing? And again, if you're kind of considering this as a growth engine, or if you're thinking about becoming a franchisee yourself, you'll probably feel pretty good about a lot of these things. So 80 franchisees are currently reporting that they enjoy operating their business. 86% enjoy being a part of their franchise organization, kind of how they fit in with that franchise family. 82% respect their brand's senior leadership, and 80% franchisees would recommend their franchisee organization to another. So really strong optimism from the franchisee community. And again, this is something I mentioned at the very beginning. Optimism is really high right now. 70% for franchisees said that they feel strongly or very strongly about the growth opportunity in their business. 84% of franchisors had that strong or very strong rating for their growth opportunities. So franchisors might be a little more optimistic than our franchisees, but I still think, even 70% versus 84%, that's still really strong numbers. And when I think about how we're hearing about how small businesses are struggling a little bit right now, and they are having challenges, I think this speaks to the strength of franchising as a business model and some of the upside that you'll feel from that community. Other interesting things that we always look at, we're always looking at average annual income. These are self-reported numbers. So we want to be really clear about that. Any income that we report from our data is self-reported to us directly from franchisees. This isn't coming from franchisors, and certainly it's not any sort of guarantee or promise of what you can expect. But based on what franchisees are telling us, we're seeing highest income opportunities coming from senior care, real estate, and personal services. Personal services can include anything from salons and aesthetics to some of the wellness-oriented brands. Any of those kinds of things get lumped into personal services. Where we're seeing the lowest income by sector, food, travel, and home services. Travel, we weren't surprised by at all. I think there was a big dip in the travel industry. Food is historically, tight profit margins in food, and also one of the bigger hit segments for all of our sit-down restaurants. And then home services was a little bit surprising to us because there's been kind of a lot of activity in that space. So something we're keeping an eye on. We also then always look at income by tenure. And again, this is no shock to us. The longer you own your franchise location, the greater the likelihood that you're going to have higher income. You're building into that business. So again, something to consider if you're thinking about making that investment, to realize that you've got a little bit of work to do on the front end to build the strength of your individual unit. And then certainly by the time we're seeing some of our 10+ year tenure franchisees, those are often multi-unit empire builders. And that's where they start to see some of the multiples in their income. And that's then reflected over here in the income by units owned. So as you tend to kind of build that empire and own more and more franchises, your income goes up correspondingly. So if you're thinking about making an investment in a franchise brand, you may consider some of these industry segments if they are interesting to you, and just to have that awareness of the work that you have to do to build your own income and what can be possible if you become a multi-unit operator. Last piece, we always like to chat just a little bit about our scores all come out in what we call an FSI, or a franchisee satisfaction index. This is the weighted score based on franchisee responses that allows us to make comparisons from industry to industry, brand to brand, across franchising. Overall, from the data that we had in that set, the FSI score right now is sitting around a 71. And that is, as we've said, the highest that we've ever seen on a 100-point scale. And that's, just a little bit more about the data. I think one of the last pieces, and this is the last piece of data I'll share, and then we'll kind of start to take some questions. We're really looking at top drivers for franchise performance, and this is for overall brand performance. So the light blue bars represent the top quartile of franchise brands that we surveyed. So the top 25% of all of the franchise brands based on their franchisee satisfaction. And then the gray bar is the lowest quartile based on franchisee satisfaction. And we pulled the top 5 categories where there is the largest gap between the top and the bottom. And the biggest gaps we see are in marketing, innovation, the effective use of technology, the way the brands communicate internally, and the training and support that they provide to franchisees. So again, this is interesting information, whether you're thinking about investing in a franchise brand. These are areas you should be asking some questions about when you go through your validation process with the brand. When you're talking to franchisees who are already in the system, ask them, how effectively does your brand use technology? Do you have a great POS system? Do you have an internal learning management system? Does your system know how to turn on a computer? These are questions you can start asking so that you're making a really informed choice when you decide to invest. And similarly, if you're thinking about expanding your small business into a franchise, you can get ahead of the curve by putting intentional thought into some of these categories and building your brand really solidly right from the beginning. If you don't have great technology now, what's going to happen when you have 10 units, when you have 20 units, when you have 50 units? How scalable are the things you are putting into place? And consider that before you really, throw gas on the fire of expanding your brand. So that's some of the data that we have to share. And I'm excited to chat a little bit more and see if you all have any questions. So I'll kind of turn off my screen share and we can get into some of the conversation.
Great. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much. What amazing data and information. And one of the things, by the way, for our attendees, please raise your hand, type your name in the chat box, or type your question in the chat box. However you'd like to communicate that. We can unmute you if you want to talk. While we're waiting for that, one question I had was on that income screen, which was really neat to see self-reported income for these franchisees. On the lower left box that showed income by tenure,
Yep.
which made a lot of sense. The longer a franchisee's open, the higher the income. That certainly you would, it just intuitively, you would expect that to
Yeah.
be the case, but it's nice to see that confirmed.
Mhm.
On those, what I was wondering actually, were those all single unit operators? Were they multi-unit operators, a combination? I was just curious when I was looking at that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's going to represent a combination of single unit operators and multi-unit operators.
Okay.
When we pull those pure, and we can separate that out, but when we pull the pure income by tenure numbers, it represents every response. So it's going to be a mix of both.
Okay. All right. I was just curious because I was wondering,
Yeah,
well, did someone start maybe in year 1 and 2 with 1 unit, and then they opened
sure.
up that second unit in year, I don't know, 3 and 4, and then by year 10 they had a handful of franchises they own. So just curious. Thank you.
Totally. Yeah, totally fair. And it is an interesting question because looking at it, even the 10 plus years operator, the
Hmm.
average income reported there was about 150,000.
Yeah.
And then if I look at income by units, the folks who have 2 to 4 units
Yeah.
report an average income of 130,000.
Yeah.
So they're already close to that 10-year mark. And then our 5+ unit operators report an income of 205,000.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's, you can achieve higher income either by tenure or by empire building, sometimes a
Yeah.
combination of both.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and what's interesting when I looked at the income by single unit operators, and
Mhm.
you compare the increase in income between operators that own 2 to 4, it was only about what was it, about a 30% or so increase, or
Yep.
about a 33% or so increase.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to think that if you're thinking of multi units, it is much more of an incremental income growth from 2 units, from unit 1 to unit 2, 3, and 4. It's incremental growth, which I found to be interesting. And really, once you hit that 5 unit marker, it really opens up for you then in terms of growth. So, I mean, maybe a cautionary discussion for someone that's wants to do 1 unit, is thinking maybe I'll open a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and so on. Well, if you're only thinking 2, 3, or 4, you got to weigh the pros and cons of lifestyle change, risk in opening up multi units versus the actual additional income. I mean, at least that's what I'm seeing out of that. You might be better served to be a single unit operator, depending on your lifestyle choice.
Well, and I think the same can be said from the franchisor's perspective. When you're
Yeah.
thinking about how you're going to offer the opportunity, that should be an intentional choice too. I think sometimes we see brands who kind of like skip right to multi-unit offerings and they're selling 3 packs and 5 packs kind of right off the bat,
Hmm.
and they don't have any kind of proof of concept for what that looks like in reality and where the opportunities of scale actually set in for a franchisee. And sometimes it works out really well, and you see multiple units opening up really quickly. Sometimes you see it be a very long time before that second unit kicks in. So I think from both perspectives, a franchisee perspective and a franchisor perspective, be thoughtful and intentional before you jump right into multi-unit.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's a great point. And certainly again, I'm using the term reinforces, but just the concept of that owner operator, that single unit operator, is really powerful for any brand. And just seeing that come through and in the data you shared, it's really interesting. um well, I love the data you shared, and then that final slide to show really where is the disparity between your top performers and lowest performers. And it looked like, as a whole, like you had said, that you've had the highest satisfactory rating going on, that you've seen, which is a plus just by and large. I think that's really, really great. But just to see those 5 categories, that as a franchisor, and really, whether, like you had mentioned, whether you're looking to franchise your business, you're brand new into this, or maybe you're a a seasoned franchisor that's been operating for 10 years or 20 years. These are things that need to be reviewed and looked at, because your franchisees may or may not be telling you that these are issues, but these are going to most likely be underlying issues there.
Oh, 100%. Like none of them are, they are all foundational to the brand. None of them should be super surprising as like key indicators of success. When I think about training and support was the lowest gap between high and low, but like the high was the highest for our top quartile around training and support. Marketing, communication, like these are big deals within a brand and within a system. And it's the brands that recognize it from the beginning and continue to do the work on it that tend to be long-term successful and are able to break away into that top quartile. To your point, it's the brands that either don't think about it ever, don't think that it's important, think that franchisees will figure it out on their own, don't, like they're not continuing to invest. That's where then you start to see that gap. And yeah, we really encourage the brands to take the feedback seriously. We've had some incredible experiences with brands who have maybe started in our bottom quartile, gotten the feedback from their franchisees, put in huge amounts of effort to revamp their systems and processes. And you see the change over time. And then they start to get into higher and higher quartiles. And when they start to make awards lists based on that feedback, it's really cool to see people who will make the investment. So, take it for what it's worth right now. If you're just starting out, now's the time to start making these investments and to grow smart.
Great. Great. Looks like we just have compliments for the presentation here. So I'm not seeing any additional questions come in. So thank you very much for that, Syed. Appreciate the feedback on that. And Emily, any parting final words you'd like to leave with us before we close this out?
No, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to share the data. We gather this information so that we can share it. We're not trying to hide anything under a bushel basket here. So if you're interested in more information, I would point you to franchisebusinessreview.com, where you're welcome to check out some of our top brands and a little bit more information about us. Or feel free to reach out to me directly. You can reach me, Emily, at franchisebusinessreview.com. And I'm happy to share over more of our content, some additional details on our data. Always happy to share this a little bit more. But yeah, just thanks for having me. And we wish you all the best in franchising. We're excited to see the business model continue to grow, and always excited to see the new brands and concepts that come along.
Great. Well, it looks like we did have a question just come through here before we end here. A question came through that says, I'm wondering whether you can recommend an organization for upgrading employees relationship. Or the employee relationship. Do you recommend that? Is that part of what you guys do?
So I'm interested in this question in terms of upgrading employee relationship. Maybe is it around kind of upgrading services that you can offer to your employees? There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And there are a lot of different companies that do things around that. If you want to reach out to me directly, I might be able to make some recommendations, but I don't have anything kind of top of mind that is speaking exactly to that. But certainly happy to continue that conversation offline. And if we can help, we certainly will.
Yeah. And I would also say to that, we do have some referrals on that as well. So if that's something you're interested in there, Syed, please go ahead, and I'd be happy to connect with you as well. I'll type my email in the box as well, where we have different referrals. We have lots of different referrals we get questions from clients similar to this often. Awesome. So I would definitely recommend talk to Emily and get some suggestions, some feedback, because they're gathering that information. And what I think is really interesting, they're able to see what the really what those top performers are doing
Yeah.
and can share that information, I think, or whatever they're allowed to share, I should
Sure.
say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
For
then,
sure.
if you're looking for a specific kind of vendor or supplier or two or three that you can maybe start you down a pathway, I'd be happy to help point you in that direction as well.
Perfect.
Well, this has been phenomenal. And I would also say too, just if people who are listening, and Emily didn't ask me to do this, but I mean, the data that Franchise Business Review provides and the reports that are available, that, basically the cost is your email address to get a lot of this great information is phenomenal. And then I just put a plug in for your own business. If you're looking to maybe get kind of a 360 review or view on your own business, your business model, your staff, your franchises, whatever it might be, definitely reach out to Emily about how you can participate and become a part of the survey to see how your franchise is faring in really a safe way, so that you can learn and discover what's going on in your organization. Sometimes when you're the leader of your company, the folks don't share with you all the little things that are going on behind the scenes. So you may not know or be aware of all of those different things. So this is a great way to find that out and how you can make your organization better and improve.
I really appreciate that. And for sure, if we can be helpful, that's great. To work with FBR, you just have to have either 10 or more franchisees or 10 or more employees and be a franchise brand. But whether you work with us, whether you work with somebody else, or you do survey work internally, ask for the feedback. Asking in any way is better than not asking at all. So whether you work with us or not, I just encourage you, ask the questions, get some feedback. That will be better than putting your head in the sand and trying to ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been excellent. Thank you all for being here. As we said, this will be live, not live. This will be available for later viewing within the next week or so. We really appreciate your time, Emily. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.